For half an hour, he had been watching his stunning wife gracefully maneuvering around the ballroom, strategically moving away from her husband as midnight approached. She was surrounded by rich and self-satisfied acquaintances, all managers from her husband's place of work, especially her obnoxious boss, who was born into wealth. They addressed her as a delicacy dish. This predictable scenario had been unfolding on New Year's holidays in his company for 2 years, and he was well aware of it. At first, he attributed it to an excessive champagne and endured it for a whole year, but in the previous year, the roaring horn became unbearable, forcing him to take action. When he felt a gentle pull on his coat, he turned around and saw Deirdre, Josephine's closest friend and work partner, standing in front of him. "Happy New Year, Mike," she exclaimed, holding out her hand for the usual friendly kiss. His lips barely touched hers before he pulled away and met her warm brown gaze. Deirdre, like his wife, was a socialite born into a privileged life from a family even richer than Joe's. He was already used to her smug expression, as if she had some secret knowledge due to her status as an aristocrat, just like his wife and boss. But this time, he noticed 2 unfamiliar emotions on her face: pity and concern. "Mike, don't worry. It's just an ordinary exchange of kisses, a tradition associated with the new year," she reassured him. Deirdre tried to calm him down, assuring him that she would soon return unharmed and once again demonstrate her deep affection for him. However, he was skeptical of her words. Deirdre went on to explain that despite his outgoing and impulsive nature, his wife genuinely loved him. She admitted that they were different. He was intellectual and reserved while she was lively and sociable. Deirdre believed that periodic communication with those who shared her lively feelings only strengthened her love for him. "All right, Deirdre," he replied. But did she spend the entire Christmas party at her workplace, under the mistletoe with her colleagues? During our visit to the Christmas party, she seemed to have spent the entire evening dancing and passionately mingling with the leaders of her company. Conversely, at the New Year's ball in my company, she danced all evening, exchanged kisses, but did not engage in any intimate relations with my colleagues. It's intriguing to observe that by kissing everyone at the party except me, she apparently re-evaluated me. I find this concept quite fascinating. Is this another New Year's custom to kiss George the full 12 times, or is it just her way of showing her affection for me, knowing about my contempt for this person? I must give Deirdre credit for her self-control. She was visibly ashamed, unable to withstand my gaze. She averted her eyes and made another attempt. "Mike, I understand that you're upset, but you have to understand," Deirdre began, but he interrupted her. "I think I understand. After 5 years of marriage, I think I really understand for the first time." He turned away from her and returned to their table, taking out his briefcase, which he had discreetly hidden under the table. Unbuttoning it carefully, he took out an impressively, exquisitely decorated gift. Without turning his back, he removed the ring that adorned his finger and secured it among the bow that had to be untied to reveal the contents. Turning to face Deirdre, he handed her the package. "I'm going to leave. Tell this to your friend when she manages to escape from the clutches of the men surrounding her, if that happens. And again give her my sincere wishes for a happy new year, and may she receive all the well-deserved blessings in the coming year." As he was about to leave, Deirdre grabbed his hand, urging him not to go. "Don't go, Mike. I'll bring her. She's had too much champagne again. You should take her home," she pleaded. I answered calmly, "No, Deirdre, I don't have to do this. She has a room in this very hotel. While I was busy with work, she attracted the attention of various men all day. I think you are well aware of this since you also happen to be in her company. She has her own car, clothes, and everything she needs. I am sure that one of the gentlemen with whom she is currently engaged will be happy to ensure her happiness. Maybe they'll do it all and maybe they won't. Don't look at me so disapprovingly. You tricked me the same way last year. I gave her a whole year to make a decision. Well, she made her choice, and so did I. Goodbye, Deirdre. I can't help but admit that it would be a huge relief if I never saw you again." As I left the grand ballroom, I greeted Helen, the HR director, whom I accompanied during the first half of the day. While my boss and his buddies organized everything at the hotel, in fact, he occupied a luxurious room. He used the company's credit card to book a luxury suite where he had an inappropriate relationship with my wife. More precisely, they slept together in this room. I have indisputable evidence in the form of photographs and videos. Helen also has some evidence, and the chairman of the board of directors will be informed about it in the near future. After leaving the ballroom, Helen and her husband approached the group of men surrounding Josephine. Deirdre was making her way through a crowd of men who were persistently trying to kiss her in a rather cheeky manner. Helen attracted the attention of several men, but their courtship was quickly stopped by the stern gaze of her husband, a retired American football player. Making her way through the crowd, she headed to CEO George Burke in his companion, slightly ahead of her friend Deirdre, stopping her husband a few steps away from her. Helen watched the unfolding scene as Deirdre looked puzzled, and her name pronounced in a harsh tone attracted Joseph's attention, forcing him to free himself from George's embrace. Helen's smile widened when she noticed her friend's surprised expression in her own face frown slightly. Deirdre handed Joe, as she called her friend, a beautifully decorated gift and said a few words that made him lean closer and ask her to repeat. "Mike left this for you," she said, and there was finality in her tone. "He's gone, Joe. He watched you flirt and engage in intimate relationships throughout the evening, and when you started kissing several men, he handed me this package and left." Joe's face lit up with a smile. "You know how Mike is," she said. "He sometimes throws little tantrums when I don't pay attention to him for a few minutes. I'll go home and apologize to him. I do not know what to do with it. He loves me. Look, even when he's upset, he still gives me gifts. Let's see what it is." "Joe, I don't think this is a gift," Deirdre began, but Joe was already eagerly untying the ribbon to open the contents of the package. When the ring slipped out of her hands and fell to the floor, she stopped, frowned, and asked, "What is it?" Deirdre sat down on the floor, picked up the ring, handed it to her, and grinned. "Isn't that your husband's wedding ring?" Perplexed, she stopped tearing the paper and looked at him. Her confusion was obvious. Taking the ring, she turned her attention to Deirdre, who murmured softly, "I tried to warn you, Joe." Wanting to open the gift, Joe began to remove the packaging and saw an untouched white box. A momentary relief swept over her, and a smile appeared on her lips. Curious, she shook the box vigorously, noting its weight, and then carefully cut the tape securing each side with her fingernail. When the tape on the third side came off, the contents of the box fell out, scattering on the floor. Quickly squatting down, she diligently collected the glossy sheets that had fallen out. With the fallen photos landed next to them, the others quickly squatted down and picked them up. In an instant, a sudden silence fell on the collective. Joe's eyes widened and shocked, and a piercing scream escaped her lips. The alarm cry immediately attracted the attention of those around them, and even more people gathered around them. Deirdre, equally incredulous, widened her eyes in disbelief. She followed George's gaze and met the look of horror on his face. With trembling hands, he picked up a 20 by 30 centimeters color photo from the ground and pressed it tightly to his expensive suit. In a moment of shock, the words burst from his lips, and he involuntarily screamed, "What the hell, Joe?" The volume of her scream attracted the attention of everyone present. When their gaze is shifted to the scattered photos, it became clear that Joe was engaged in intimate activities with persons who were not her husband. The pictures showed both Joe and George, as well as other executives of the company, where Mike worked, Joe's colleagues and bosses. The number of photos exceeded all attempts to explore a huge number of positions in intimate activity. Mike successfully selected photos that testified to Josephine's openness to various types of intimate activity with men, women, and even toys, regardless of their combination and quantity. The sight of these explicit images stunned Joe, and she fainted. When she collapsed to the floor, George's shoe prevented her from hitting her head on a hard tile surface, which could lead to serious traumatic brain injury. Deirdre quickly rushed to Joe and gently lifted her head, gently stroking her cheek. She screamed, repeating her name over and over again. "Joe! Joe! Are you okay? Talk to me, Joe!" At this time, both women remained lying on the floor, and the other members of the company began to collect scattered photos and examine them. One of the women abruptly turned around and forcefully hit her husband, who was engrossed in the photo he was holding in his hands. "You're a disgrace. No wonder you can't satisfy my needs anymore," she said angrily. He looked at her dumbfounded, but when she swung her purse, he received a quick blow in the right eye. When she delivered a strong kick to the sore spot, he squeezed his eyes shut in excruciating pain and collapsed to the floor. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the woman quickly knelt down and began to scrupulously study the scattered photos. After a short pause, she raised her head and addressed the audience. "Ladies who are married to the respected management of Taylor & Son, it may be in your interest to view these pictures. They depict not only your husbands, but also some others," she said with a note of cunning in her voice. "If you want to save on the surfaces of divorce lawyers, contact me. Together, we will be able to explore the possibility of obtaining a group tariff." When 9 more women knelt down to examine the photos, the men instinctively began to retreat amid the commotion. One person loudly announced the presence of flash drives, emphasizing the unknown content. A well-dressed elderly man, inflamed with anger, shouted at his partner, reminding her of the marriage contract and accusing her of insidious fraud. In response, the blonde woman vented her anger, calling her partner a liar and saying that their meeting meant nothing. Accusing the other woman of persistently pursuing them, she presented 2 more photos before storming off, vigorously waving photos and showering him with curses. He took a step back, turned around, and ran away. Meanwhile, another woman was crying, pressing one hand to her chest and waving a photo with the other. Her husband, burying his face in his hands, was also sobbing. The man took out a photo, held it up to the stunning woman standing in front of him, and sat loudly. "So you're bisexual? What's going on here? You have repeatedly told me that the 3 of us will not have it because you were not interested in women." Suddenly she blushed and hurriedly left, barely keeping her balance in high heels. At this time, another woman took several photos from the stack and began calling names, making her way to the center of the hall. The embarrassed woman stopped her and carefully studied one of the photos with an enraged expression on her face. She turned to her husband, who began to retreat, and she approached him vigorously, gesturing with a photo. This scene was repeated 5 more times, and at each repetition, blows were inflicted on the ears and eyes of the victim's companions. Joe, who had already regained consciousness, watched the terrible events unfolding around them with an indifferent look, while a well-dressed man in an expensive tuxedo knelt down next to Joe, showing concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. Joe looked at him curiously and nodded. "Who are you?" "I am Josephine Lord," he replied grimly. "But I'm afraid no one can help me now." "Are you really Reynolds Lord?" she asked with obvious disbelief. He just nodded. She was curious to know who he was, and he handed her a sheath of papers. He quickly took a picture of her on his phone and made a spectacular statement. "I am a Baffet, Josephine Reynolds Lord. You have been officially served with a court order." His voice rang throughout the hall when he presented the audience with convincing evidence of adultery set out in the statement of Michael Morris Lord about the divorce. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you have not had the opportunity to view the photos, then an alternative option is to request a copy of the divorce documents, which are available on the internet as open documents," he announced. "In these documents, you will find a complete list of persons with whom Joe has had intimate relations over the past year, including a detailed description of the place and time of these meetings. For a small fee, I can provide you with a link to Joe's website, where you will find a detailed report on her actions since January 1st last year. This way, you will be able to study this information to determine if your spouse is involved. Those who have been involved in paired, intimate relationships with her 3, 4, or more can contact me and get a link to her website for nominal fee. For an additional fee, I can provide digital copies of the participants' actions. Such evidence can be very useful in court. I am waiting for your calls." He made a deep bow and left, leaving behind tears, fear, and panic. He understood that big trouble was waiting for him for this trick, but a solid salary was worth it. Additionally, while in New York, he had the support of his influential family in New Jersey. Joe sat clutching the divorce papers in her lap, supported by her friend's arms, with her mouth open and utter bewilderment. Looking around at the faces around her, she caught hostility, sympathy, rage, and concern in them. Throughout her privileged life, she had known passion and envy, but now they were nowhere to be found. The weight of loss and shame suddenly became insurmountable. She clung desperately to Deirdre, burying her face in her friend's chest, and sobbed uncontrollably. George Taylor ordered his subordinates to collect and destroy these damned photos. Then he turned his gaze to Helen and ordered, "By Monday, there should be a letter of reprimand for Mike Lord on my desk, and under it, the documents for dismissal." Helen kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Taylor," she began, "I apologize for the unfortunate news that Mr. Lord submitted his resignation this afternoon. He applied 2 weeks in advance, took advantage of the vacation you approved last week, packed up all his belongings, and left the premises. But I'm obliged to inform you that I cannot accept his resignation. I intend to reprimand him and then dismiss him. Rest assured he will not be given any more opportunities in this organization. I apologize again, Mr. Taylor, but it should be noted that before he left, he met with the chairman of the board, and unfortunately your father accepted his resignation. Mr. Lord has already taken a job at one of the companies he previously advised, pending your written consent, sir." Taylor's face turned a rich red color, causing concern among those who watched his outburst of anger. He angrily swore at his father and Mike Lord. Helen and her husband watched his humiliation with obvious pleasure, imperceptibly holding hands and maintaining a neutral appearance. Mike Lord went on a trip from New York to Austin, Texas in the recently acquired Chevy High Country Suburban, a reliable four-wheel drive car equipped with a powerful 6L turbo diesel engine. This SUV was carefully ordered by Mike himself in the autumn period as soon as the latest models appeared on the market, and just yesterday, it was delivered to him with convenience. According to the navigation system, the estimated time of Mike's trip to his new place of residence in Austin was exactly 24 hours and 32 minutes along the route carefully chosen by him. Knowing that it would take a long time to immerse himself in the culture of the rural states through which he was to travel, he assumed that it would take most of his week-long journey. Being a country boy from Idaho by birth, he intended to fully immerse himself in the essence of every state he passed through. When he got to Virginia, he made a conscious decision to turn off the main highways, preferring the picturesque country roads that John Denver sang about. In addition, he wanted to get acquainted with the quaint towns of Carolina, which were immortalized in the melodious stories of Mary Chapin Carpenter. His plans included a treat with delicious homemade jellies and jams, which were sold in charming roadside kiosks and local shops, as well as meals in the same establishments that are often visited by the locals themselves. Trying to escape from the crowded highways and chaotic city life that had become unbearable for him, he decided to split his checking and savings accounts. But this decision was made after he bought his SUV. Although his corrupt wife earned significantly more than him throughout the marriage, buying a car for $88,000 would hardly have equalized their chances. Despite this, he got some satisfaction from using some of her money to make this purchase. They agreed that he would keep his investments in pension funds, and she would keep hers on the terms he proposed. If she agrees to his generous terms and signs the divorce papers within the next 10 days, he will grant her a penthouse and waive any rights to her trust fund. Listening to the best traditional country music station, the Roadhouse, on Sirius XM, he could not get rid of Joe's contempt for this genre, as well as his hatred of retro music. Switching to the next station, he settled on classic vinyl, asserting his independence and getting rid of the image of a naive cockled as she had painted him for the last few years. Last year, when the New Year's ball sank to the bottom, he made a conscious decision to take control of his life. He devoted the whole year to putting his thoughts in order. Although he was tormented by doubts, he believed that it would be difficult for Taylor and Son to survive without him under George's incapable leadership, deprived of the numerous design developments and patents he had contributed to the company over the past 5 years. He foresaw its inevitable collapse within a year or two. A smile appeared on his face as he pondered this suggestion. He smiled, knowing that thanks to his efforts, more than half of the sales and profits have been received recently. Armed with exceptional developments in design solutions, he was looking forward to the launch of his new company. although George's father, Randolph Taylor, the current chairman of the board of directors, is likely to sell the company before its collapse. He could not help but rejoice that his true capabilities will be revealed before that happens. This thought brought a satisfied smile to his face as he reflected on the events of the previous evening. He successfully portrayed George in his own life, who worked as a journalist, as shameful and lacking moral principles in society. Next year, he planned to show George's incompetence as a businessman, since his new company would easily overcome and destroy the old one, like crushing a bug on a windshield. The thought brought a smile to his face. He was looking forward to when Josephine's parents would find out about the scandalous events that took place at the ball and become silent observers, hiding in plain sight of everyone. Helen had already called him and was excitedly telling him how great everything had turned out. The fact that Joe scattered the photos all over the ballroom he did not even dream of, although he deliberately made the box so that when cutting the film from 3 sides they fell apart. Joseph's parents looked at him unkindly from the very beginning and were horrified when their beloved ideal daughter decided to marry him, and he didn't even have a League of Saints education. The fact that the engineering diploma from the Colorado School of Mines and the master's degree from the University of Michigan were lost didn't matter to him. No matter how much his specialty was in demand, he believed that the liberal arts education he received at Brown University was much better than a mediocre education. A satisfied smile appeared on his face as he thought about the chaos he had caused and what success he would achieve in the future. The Arter and her husband Albert accompanied Josephine to her house. As soon as they entered the house and Josephine looked around her surroundings, she burst into tears again. On the way home, she mentally prepared for the upcoming conversation with Mike. She tried to justify her actions, and in her heart, she understood that all this was just a weak attempt to calm herself down for betraying their marriage. Although she tried to convince herself that her extramarital affairs did not cause harm and served only as a means to improve their lives, she understood that this was a weak excuse. Trying to downplay the importance of her amateur sex life, she claimed that it helped her cope with surging desires and allowed her to learn new techniques to diversify their intimate life. But even as she said these words, she realized the absurdity of her reasoning and understood that Mike would see through her. He strictly adhered to the marriage vows. The mere mention of exchanging partners or joining other games cost him a sharp surge of anger. So why did she foolishly expect him to agree to the deceptive story she was about to present? In her heart, she realized that a spark had disappeared in her marriage, but when she entered their apartment and found that all his belongings had disappeared, she realized that she had blindly descended into the abyss created by herself. Collapsing to the floor, she sobbed in pain and cursed her arrogance. She was trying to find a plausible excuse for her reckless act. She was always confident that she would be able to avoid any consequences and firmly believed that even if she was caught, she could easily manipulate her innocent and trusting husband to forgive her. This strategy worked flawlessly for 3 long years until tonight, when her marriage and reputation were completely destroyed. Time flew by for Mike. Before throwing the old SIM card into the dirty city snow, he took care of cloning it to ensure uninterrupted communication all the way to his new place of residence in Texas. Throughout the week, he diligently sent out personal emails one by one. The partners received personalized letters with attachments, which led to the collapse of one marriage after another. The mere thought of such an outcome made Mike grin. Only yesterday, he sent a letter to the Ardress husband, and anticipating AL's reaction, he smiled broadly. Although Jo herself was responsible for her choice, it was the Ardress Frank story about her promiscuous relationships accompanied by calls from her friends to indulge in such pleasures that had a strong influence on her final decision. On the 4th day, Deirdre and Jo were sitting on the couch in their New York apartment. However, the situation changed dramatically. Deirdre was evicted from the apartment by AL. Such an unexpected downturn occurred after AL stumbled upon an email and watched a video consisting of 5 explicit scenes showing intimate life. In addition, the video showed a conversation between Deirdre and Jo in which they shamelessly discussed their conquests and pleasures, even calling the names of their lovers and laughing at forgetful husbands. To make matters worse, Albert forwarded copies of this conversation to each of the wives of the aforementioned women he was familiar with, most of them, if not all of them. The fire continued to spread, and a smirk appeared on Albert's face as he watched the flames. George, on the contrary, found himself in a difficult situation. His father not only deprived him of his job, but also disilem him. In addition, the father fired all the top managers guilty of undermining the reputation of the company. As acting CEO, my father took over the management of the company while Helen, recently appointed Vice President of Talent Development and Recruitment, diligently searched for outstanding executives around the world after passing the exit from Martin Luther King Boulevard. Mike headed towards Cesar Chavez Street. As he continued moving, he couldn't help but notice the Austin Convention Center to his right, and Lady Bird Lake gracefully shimmering to his left. Crossing Converse Avenue, he finally reached his destination, a luxury apartment in high-rise at 70 Rainey, provided exclusively by his new company. Having paid the rent in full for the next 6 months, Mike got enough time to find the perfect house with lush trees and a sprawling lawn, which he had long dreamed of. As soon as he settled in, his plans included adding a furry companion to his life, a faithful dog. He is in search of a reliable and compatible partner to create a new home and family. His new acquaintances have organized a meeting at which you will be presented as recently divorced and guaranteed to meet several suitable women. Meanwhile, turmoil continued in New York. Unfaithful partners betrayed others, and attackers divulged information about their abusers. Helen made sure that Mike stayed up to date with all the events. He watched the ever-burning flames of the huge New York City fire he had ignited and smiled at the same time. And the more he learned, the more joyful the fact that he had thought everything out so well became, and he went to Texas. Story 2. Gentlemen, I want to draw your attention to the fact that this story is fiction. But who knows? In a crazy world, anything is possible. Let's get started. Over the past 3 decades, computers have significantly changed their daily lives. Their influence is noticeable on a global scale and has both positive and negative consequences. Unfortunately, almost a year ago, my laptop became the source of an unpleasant experience that changed my life. During a week-long meeting in Salt Lake City, which marked my first departure from home, I made the usual phone call to check on how things were going. But to my horror, while working with a computer, I accidentally stumbled upon a candid live performance. Despite her mature age, the woman on my modest 14-inch screen had a curvy figure with well-defined curves in all the right places, hips and breasts leaning slightly towards each other. They met their lips in a passionate, lingering kiss. After the kiss, they separated and moved to a different position. Stunned by what I saw, I reached the limit. I immediately exited the program and turned off the computer. The scene before me did not arouse the slightest desire or interest. The scene that unfolded in front of me finally pushed me away. My beloved wife, Martha, was depicted on the screen. I realized that this frank, intimate encounter took place in our own home in Sacramento. Martha, a stunning 47-year-old woman, had unconditional attractiveness. Her figure was distinguished by alluring curves that always fascinated me. As a 49-year-old architect, Bob McLeod, I have been a faithful husband for a quarter of a century, and now I find myself in the depressing role of a cuckold. For some time now, I have felt an alarming tension in our relationship with Martha. She seemed distant, absent-minded when we were alone, hardly paying attention to my words. Our intimate moments have become rare and sparse at best. I couldn't ignore her new habit of working late in the evenings and even on weekends. As suspicions grew in connection with the upcoming trip, it became quite obvious that I needed to find a way to look after her during my absence. Although it was not without costs, it was not too difficult. I decided to install a new security system by discreetly placing motion-sensing video cameras all over the house. Having the ability to remotely monitor each camera from anywhere in the world, I found solace in the fact that on that fateful night I discovered her betrayal. At first, I was overcome with self-pity. For a short time, anger overcame me. Unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to vent this anger, as a result of which my blood pressure jumped to a dangerous level. Suddenly, I lost consciousness. Realizing that something was wrong with me, Despite my serious condition, I managed to contact the rescue service and inform them of my whereabouts at the Hilton Hotel before I lost consciousness. When I came to, it was already night, and I found myself in the intensive care unit. In short, after conducting a series of examinations, I found out that I am in an advanced stage of endocarditis with significant damage to most of the heart valves. Within a few days, I was confronted with two heartbreaking facts, metaphorically speaking. I was devastated to learn that my 25-year marriage was over and that my once loving wife had betrayed me. In addition, I was physically broken to learn that without a heart transplant, my chances of survival are slim. In less than a year, I would most likely have followed the gradual and deliberate path of ending our marriage with Marta. But the situation I found myself in left me no time. Finding myself in an unfamiliar hospital bed, isolated and helpless, I turned my attention to thinking through the remaining months of my life. The last months, I must admit that I may seem heartless and vindictive since my intentions are primarily aimed at taking revenge on my wife and her lover. But to be honest, judge me if you want, I'm sure I won't live to see the trials, and if I had a strong dislike for firearms, I would have returned home and inflicted irreparable physical harm on the two of them. Meanwhile, the inexperiency of the flight did not allow me to do this, and I had to endure a long ambulance ride home. To my brother Steve's surprise, an ambulance arrived at his home in LC Grove, California. Given the circumstances, I decided not to return home and not burden my children, leaving my twin brother Steve as the only acceptable option. When a stranger or just a friend looks at us, it becomes impossible for him to distinguish us from each other. However, those who know us intimately can easily notice the difference. One of the notable differences is that I, like Steve, have only one kidney, but the difference is manifested in the configuration of our kidneys. I have the right one, and he has the left one, which in fact is my point. You see, in his early 20s, Steve won on numerous trips, not paying attention to the fact that a severe infection lives in him. This infection has been secretly undermining his health for several months. When medical workers eventually discovered this terrible disease, he was on the verge of death due to acute kidney failure. To save his life, he underwent a number of examinations and operations. With one of my kidneys, he managed to recover miraculously, and this explains why I naturally turned to him for help during my period of despair. It was not necessary to call him on purpose. By the will of fate, when the manic carefully drove me to the house in a wheelchair, which was a mandatory protocol despite my ability to move without assistance, the front door opened and Steve came out of it. "Bob, what's going on? Why is there an ambulance in a wheelchair here?" asked Steve curiously. Grinning, I replied, "Well, Steve, it's good to see you too," and got out of the wheelchair to say hello to him. Quickly switching my attention to the medic, I held out my hand for a handshake. "Thanks, buddy. How about we have a cup of coffee before we go back to Salt Lake City?" I suggested. The medic politely declined, saying, "No, thank you. My wives are looking forward to my return, and I would not like to give them additional reasons for complaints. Dissatisfaction with one wife is one thing, but coping with three is quite another matter." Having sympathized with him, I said goodbye to him, advising him to take care of himself. Watching his slow walk to the ambulance as if the whole weight of the world was on his shoulders, I couldn't help but feel a sense of empathy. Turning away from the scene, I walked past Steve and entered the house, my younger brother following me, just like 49 years ago when he was an hour behind me. His presence turned my mother's ill-fated experience into a nightmare. Now I understood why my mother treated me with great respect. I went to the refrigerator, took out 2 bottles of beer, sat down at the table, and handed one to Steve. After a short pause, he asked the question again, trying to find out the reason for my concern. Well, I began taking a deep breath. I, frankly speaking, am not all right with my health. My heart resembles Swiss cheese, cut with holes, and the remnants of vitality in it are rapidly drying up. The doctor's words were a heavy blow to me. He informed me that my stay on this earth is less than a year. My brother, stunned by this news, abruptly rose from his seat, a pained expression appearing on his face. "Bob, this is just awful. Can't they make a transplant like it was with me?" "What is it?" he asked, hope flickering in his eyes. "Well, they put me on the transplant list," I explained, "but the doctor said the odds were against me." Our rare blood type creates an additional obstacle combined with my age and the fact that I have only one functioning kidney. I'm not very high on the priority list. My brother's reaction showed his disappointment. It's very sad, he lamented, leaning back in his chair. My brother took a moment to find out how Marta reacted to this sad news. I was silent, meeting his gaze to give him the opportunity to put the puzzle together himself. It was evident from his expression that he had come to the realization that Marta was most likely unaware of what was happening. "My God!" he exclaimed, his voice filled with concern. "She doesn't know, does she? You came here straight from Salt Lake City." Confusion and worry clouded his face as he searched for answers. "What's wrong, Bob? Why didn't you go home?" he asked, wanting to clarify the situation. Taking a deep breath, I shared the truth with him. "Steve, I discovered that I had a heart condition after I had a heart attack in Salt Lake City," I said, feeling the weight of reality hanging in the air, and after I found out about Marta's infidelity, a heart attack almost took my life, and I had to deal with the consequences. Well, I stuttered, trying to find words to express my emotional shock. Steve intervened, wanting to understand how I had uncovered Marta's betrayal, but I waved off his question, remarking, "It doesn't matter how, the important thing is that I have only a few months left to live, and I don't want to endure the pain anymore. Divorce from her is out of the question." After assessing my determination, Steve asked me to clarify my future plans. "What are you going to do?" he asked. A mischievous grin appeared on my face, and I replied, "First of all, I want to save as much money as possible for the remaining months, my friend. I will indulge in pleasures. In addition, I'm going to review my will and life insurance policies. This insidious woman will not get anything from my death. Everything will go for the benefit of our children." Suddenly, I was seized with an alarming realization. Were these children mine at all? How long has Marta been deceiving me? My voice trailed off, leaving Steve at a loss. "What happened? What is it?" he asked, sensing my anxiety. Dumbfounded, I confessed how everything is running. I doubt the paternity of these children. It looks like I'm going to have to do a DNA test to find out the truth. Steve, trying to comfort me gently, intervened. "Wait, brother. Don't let your thoughts wander along this path yet. When it comes to such a limited time, there is no need to let the heart consume you. It is better, as they say, to let sleeping dogs lie down." "You're right," I admit it, feeling the weight of fatigue pressing down on me. "I really need a rest. But please don't say a word to Marta while I'm sleeping. I have only a few months left, and I need my brother's support." Steve hugged me, his hand comforting me. He understood the gravity of the situation. The next morning, he took a day off from work and took over the role of my chauffeur for the whole day. The first destination was the bank. I carefully extracted the funds that we managed to save and liquidated all the valuables hidden in the safe. The total amount was about $150,000. Then I turned to my employer, providing the necessary medical documents, and unexpectedly quit for health reasons. When I made this statement, an unusual gleam of emotion flashed in the eyes of my usually calm boss. Quickly, literally an hour later, I received a check indicating the accumulated vacation pay, unpaid salary, and all my contributions to the 401k. When the clock struck noon, I found out that I had more than $500,000 in my hands, both in cash and in checks, and I was going to cash the latter quickly right after lunch. I made an appointment with a lawyer, and Steve eagerly began to pry details of my plans for me. Having secured his trust, I promised that I would tell him everything by the end of the day. The lawyer carefully prepared all the necessary documents for our arrival. I signed various papers indicating that all the remaining property that I did not have time to liquidate would benefit my children. Steve, who acted as a witness, put his signature, confirming the correctness of the actions carried out. Among the possessions I had were a charming country cottage given to me by my parents, my car, boat, and a few other things. Subsequently, I issued a power of attorney in the name of Marta, allowing her to receive any funds from the possible sale of our family home. Considering that our net worth is about $250,000, this amount should have become part of her inheritance. I gave the lawyer a letter and asked him to give it to Martha during their meeting scheduled for the next day. The letter began with the words, "Dear wife, your secret betrayal has dealt me a heavy blow. I could never imagine that there would come a moment in our life when I would call you nothing but a lying cheater. It hurts me very much to admit that you betrayed me, that you stabbed me in the back by committing treason. Once I believed in the purity of our love, but now the truth has inevitably surfaced. In this regard, I am giving you a power of attorney, allowing you to sell our common house. As a decent person, I have withdrawn all other funds from our joint bank accounts. The house will be your legitimate contribution to our joint existence. I refuse to stoop to stealing. Everything will be divided equally between us. I won't even seek a divorce, as it will only confer in the pain that you have caused me. I will find solace in the fact that our paths will no longer cross. Leaving you, I can only hope for your speedy demise, accompanied by excruciating agony. May you perish in hell. While I was writing these venomous words, Steve was looking over my shoulder, reading them with a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. You seem to have matured enough not to let your pain control your actions. My brother, remarked Steve. I answered, remembering the wisdom of my father. Dad always stressed that you should not let emotions dictate the choice in life. After writing the letter, I went to my insurance agent to change the beneficiary of the life insurance policy. The payments will be divided equally between my two children, not opening up the possibility that his company would soon refuse to pay me insurance compensation. I refrained from disclosing details to a compassionate insurance agent. By the end of the day, I was tired again. Steve kindly took me to his house, realizing that I urgently needed a rest. The next morning, when my brother was going to work, I watched him closely. Although he kindly offered to take another day off, I insisted that he stick to his usual daily routine, not wanting to further disrupt his life. As soon as he left, I quickly returned to my room, packed my things, and quickly called a taxi. Less than 2 hours later, I was already on a plane bound for Acapulco. Realizing that neither Steve nor our children would likely be able to keep my move a secret from Martha for a long time, I firmly decided to spend the coming months away from her. I needed to get as much joy out of life as possible, and the separation from my wife served as an excellent starting point. After renting a villa, I resorted to the help of a maid who not only cooked perfectly but also had a warm character. Her presence proved invaluable. In addition, I arranged for a consultation with a world-renowned Mexican cardiologist, which provided me with proper medical care during my absence. After 2 weeks, I contacted my children and brother, informing them of my whereabouts. As for my dear brother, I still had to discuss some details with him. In addition to the note, I left him explaining my sudden departure from the country. My brother asked with annoyance, "Why did you run away like that, Bob?" And then came the answer, and guess what your wife was looking for comfort from? Damn it! Realizing that he could adopt a facade of compassion, I assured him, "It's okay, Steve. I know about your ability to play the role of an attentive guy." Continuing the conversation, I said, "Anyway, I wanted to call and let you know that I have settled in Mexico, and I really like spending time here." Excitement filled my voice as I added, "The kids are planning to come to me next week, but they promised to keep it a secret from their mother." Curiosity was born in me, and I asked, "What about you, Steve? Will you be able to come after their visit?" I asked Dieter Lee. "Of course," we agreed, the brother replied. "I'll take a vacation at work." "And where exactly are you?" he clarified. Convinced that I was right, I advised him, "Just book a ticket to Acapulco and tell me all the details as soon as you arrive. They will come for you." Sensing a note of skepticism, Steve grumbled, "Don't you trust me to keep secrets, brother? It's like a scene from a spy movie." I reassured him, "It's not about trust, but rather caution. I didn't even tell the kids about it. I don't want to take any chances." At the airport, I was looking forward to Steve's arrival. We quickly packed his luggage and headed to the waiting limo, ready to go on this unique adventure together. We set off on an hour-long journey from Acapulco through the picturesque countryside. As we near our destination, Steve felt a sense of admiration. "Damn it, Bob, is this the villa you rented?" he exclaimed, shocked by the splendor that opened before us. I grinned and explained, "No, actually, it's an extension of my doctor's medical center. Sorry for the confusion, but I had an appointment here on the day you arrived." I invited Steve to come inside with me, instructing the limo driver to take care of his luggage while we waited for a doctor's examination. The nurse gracefully led us into a quiet waiting room where we were the only customers at the moment. And soon after the nurse left, another nurse came and holding out a tray with soft drinks. Grateful each of us took a glass of fresh juice. "Salute," I said, raising my glass toward my brother. Steve supported me, drained his glass in one motion. Driven by curiosity, Steve began to ask about the reputation of the doctor we were going to see. Does he possess some kind of miraculous remedy that is unknown in the United States? He asked. I grinned, shaking my head. No, not really, I replied, but he is known as an experienced heart transplant surgeon. Whether he's really exceptional, I can't say for sure. I chose him because he doesn't have a rigid moral code. I explained to Steve, watching his curious expression. He replied, puzzled, "Rigid ethics? What do you mean?" I went on to explain, well, for an adequate price, he doesn't care about the origin of the organ. And if he is offered an additional amount, he can even personally deal with receiving it. A sense of shock was reflected on Steve's face as he tried to make sense of my words. "Bob, this is not serious." He started to object, but I interrupted him, feeling a wave of dizziness sweep over me. Getting up from my seat, I went to my brother and took his hand. "Steve, you're my brother," I sent in a heartfelt tone. "I'd do anything for you," I muttered, desperate to reveal the truth before his consciousness slipped away. "Actually, I've already given you one of my kidneys. And how did you repay me? By betraying your own brother, the man who saved your life by sleeping with my wife?" Anger and betrayal overwhelmed me when I confronted Steve with the harsh reality of his actions. My voice hardened, consumed by revenge for this unforgivable act. "I demand that my kidney be returned to me, and while we're at it, I'll take your heart. It's payback time, brother." There was a chilling determination in my words when I turned to the wisdom of our father. Our father always said that we both have hearts in the right place. Soon it will be confirmed for you, too. I want to draw the listener's attention to the fact that this story is made up, and it should not be perceived as advice or solutions that can be used in real life. Unsure that my last attack was really perceived by him with understanding, I pressed the call button and called the orderlies to the ward so that they would prepare us for further action. After a few weeks of post-operative recovery, I said goodbye to Mexico and returned to California. But I was still too weak to go back to work, and so I asked my children to help me with the arrangement of the cottage. Although most of my funds were exhausted, I still had enough money to last a few more months without having to look for a job. Given my circumstances, I was unable to receive unemployment benefits or health insurance. Steve's absence did not go unnoticed, which raised questions about his sudden disappearance. An unexpected turn of events was that my wife discovered the truth after my return. The children informed me that at the initiative of their mother, who contacted the police, a search was underway for their Uncle Steve. The following week, a police detective came to the cottage and asked me for any information about Steve's whereabouts. I sincerely shared that the last time I saw him in Mexico, he was alive and well, but since then, I have not received any messages from him. The inspector, of course, caught a hint of suspicion, but exactly what fears he harbored remained unclear. Being in another country, there was little he could do to intervene. He appeared occasionally, perhaps hoping to witness my confession or to see me collapse under the weight of guilt. Eventually, his visit stopped. I understood that the day would inevitably come when I would have to face my wife directly. On a fine summer day, busy repairing the cottage, I diligently painted the walls of the old barn without taking off my shirt and unaware of her approach. Stunned by her presence, she asked, "Is that where you're hiding?" I answered firmly without even looking back. "No, I'm not hiding." I focused on the task by applying paint to the wall with a brush. My children are the ones who are really important in my life. They know where to find me, I stressed. Martha, wanting to enlist support, asked, "What about me? Don't I count?" My answer was concise, not anymore. There was a heavy silence between us for a while. Then, with a touch of timidity, Martha finally spoke, confessing, "I haven't had a chance to tell you how sorry I am, Bob." I realized that she intended to stay here if I didn't take action in response. I put the brush back in the jar and turned to face her. Her eyes widened in surprise when she noticed a bright scar adorning my chest, a constant reminder that I had undergone a heart transplant. Realizing her shock, I made a direct offer if it comforts you. Say whatever you need. but then immediately leave. Understand that I no longer have any emotions for you, either positive or negative." Tears flowed down her face, causing no response in me. I stood there devoid of any semblance of emotion, no anger, no pity, nothing at all. As I watched her mental turmoil, I was overcome by a feeling of detached indifference. Then she asked curiously, "What is it?" She pointed her finger at my chest, and I was overcome with irritation. "It's just a scar," I replied curtly. "I needed a heart transplant, and I did it." With curiosity written all over her face, she continued, "Have the police been interested in Steve?" With the frankness born of truth, I confirmed, "Yes," they asked, and I told them the truth that I didn't know anything about his whereabouts, but I mentioned that a part of him will always remain in me, right here, tapping lightly on the sternum where my new heart was located. I turned away to pick up my t-shirt. By chance, Martha saw Scar left after a recent operation to access my left kidney. She was overcome with curiosity and asked, "What happened there? Is this what a scar looks like after kidney surgery?" Irritated and hasty, I replied with another ill-considered remark, "Well, as it turned out, my old part was returned to me." It took Martha a moment to comprehend my words, but when she did, her complexion paled, and without saying a word, she abruptly turned and ran away, disgusted. I muttered to myself, fortunately, I refrained from offering her one of my last remaining beers. I received the divorce papers, signed them, and immediately sent them back, finally severing my relationship with Martha. From that moment on, our paths no longer crossed. To dispel all doubts, I conducted a DNA analysis that confirmed that my children are really biologically mine. Story 3. At the tender age of 24, I, a 32-year-old man, married my first wife Olivia, who also recently turned 32. Our young hearts were captivated by love, and I decided that she was the embodiment of perfection. But my naivety soon became apparent, as I was greatly mistaken. At the time of the blissful infatuation, I considered our love unbreakable, but Olivia's swift departure in favor of a successful businessman destroyed my illusions. It was at this moment that I finally saw her true desires hidden behind the mask. I can't remember exactly the moment when Olivia caught my attention. Although we grew up in the same town and attended the same school, our paths did not cross in the same circle of friends. Olivia was undoubtedly one of the brightest girls in our school, and I'm a contrary, was just a nerd. It never occurred to me that I might have any chance with her. Now, fast forward a few years after graduating from university. I found myself back in our modest town, preparing to start working at a veterinary clinic. I was faced with the need to move to a new apartment. Naturally, the transition from the bustling city life of a university to the quiet life of a small town was a significant change. Despite this, I was looking forward to the opportunity to meet old friends again and be close to loved ones. After several nights of adapting to the new environment, I decided to go downtown to a local bar and meet familiar faces. After receiving a generous offer to treat friends to a drink, I headed to the bar. As I approached the bar, I was overcome by a sense of familiarity, hinting at something that I could not understand. It took a while to realize it, but when it happened, it hit me like lightning. The amazing girl I crossed paths with every day at school turned into a wonderful woman. "What should I give you, honey?" "What is it?" she asked, her voice warm and penetrating. I couldn't deny the truth of what happened next. My heart started pounding, and a wave of nervousness swept over me. At that moment, I felt that I was transported back to the awkward teenage years, became a bore again. I froze in place, the expression on my face empty and devoid of any coherent thought. It seemed that time dragged unendlessly, although most likely it was only a matter of seconds. When I tried to speak, the words came awkwardly out of my mouth in a faint what sounded at that moment. I was overcome by a feeling of stupidity, as if I was the most important idiot on earth. What happened to me? Having spent the last 4 years confidently navigating a bustling city, communicating with countless women, I now felt like a bundle of nerves. And yet, there was something about Olivia that always had such an impact on me. "Did you go to Westbrook School?" Olivia asked, pouring drinks. Her question took me by surprise, as I always thought she didn't notice me. Throughout the evening, I constantly offered to buy drinks for our company, using this as an opportunity to strike up a conversation. It's been many years since I met my friends, and none of us wanted this evening to end. That night at the bar, I came across another good reason this day. Her name was Olivia. Either the alcohol had clouded my mind or Olivia's unexpectedly sincere nature, but as the night passed, I calmed down more and more in her presence. When the bar was getting ready to close, she brazenly asked for my phone and quickly typed her number into it. Next year, life changed for the better. The clinic where I worked decided to extend my working day, which significantly increased my income. After getting a mortgage and preparing to move into my first home, my life took an unexpected turn when I met Olivia at a bar. From the very first meeting, it became clear that she was exactly the person with whom I wanted to spend the rest of my days. After just 5 months of our relationship, I plucked up the courage and proposed, and to my joy, she accepted. Less than a year had passed since we exchanged vows and entered the marriage path. Although relatives and friends expressed concern about the speed of development of our relationship, their opinion did not matter to me at all. The first years of our marriage seemed to me like a magical dream filled with love and happiness. At the clinic, I received an income sufficient to support both of us. Although we weren't rich, it covered our expenses and allowed us to live comfortably. As soon as we got married, Olivia decided to leave her job at the bar. She expressed a desire to take a break from work and focus on creativity. At first, it seemed strange to me because she never showed a penchant for painting, drawing, or any other pursuits. But I wanted to support my spouse. Unfortunately, luck did not favor her passion for creativity. When her former boss approached her with an offer to work as a part-time bartender during peak hours and during major events, despite the fact that she was experienced and passionate about her work, she had no desire to do it on a permanent basis. For several years, our relationship was going well until one day her former boss from the bar turned to her again. This time it was about an important corporate event held in her city. While known executives and owners of companies from all over the state came to our town to explore investment opportunities and business expansion, Olivia's boss needed experienced and capable employees to participate in the upcoming month-long event, which led to her temporary involvement. Tempted by the generous reward, she quickly accepted the job. At first, I didn't attach any importance to this, but after a couple of weeks I began to feel that something was wrong. Olivia worked every evening, extending her working day beyond the norm. Considering that bartenders usually finished their shift after midnight, I saw no reason to doubt her behavior. In the first days, she returned home until 3 o'clock in the morning. But a week later, I woke up to the alarm clock ringing at 7 a.m. and realized that Olivia was not in bed with me. Interested, I looked into the phone and saw a message from her in which she explained that today was the last evening of corporate events. They were attended by important clients who stayed late, and she did not know when she would finish. Apparently, these influential clients were willing to shell out a significant amount of money. At first, I didn't object, deciding that this was just a one-time case. Over time, I began to fear a change in her daily routine. She used to finish work at 8 a.m. and usually came home around that time, but lately it seemed she began to be absent much later. By the time I got home, she was already leaving for work. It had been at least 4 or 5 days since I last saw her. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked about the estimated time of her return, to which she replied that at 9 a.m. To my surprise, the recording showed that she was returning home only in the afternoon by noon. When she came home, she was surprised to see that she didn't look tired. In addition, it was obvious that no institution was open in the morning, especially bars, which, as a rule, do not allow night shift workers to continue working during the day. As a husband who has always trusted our relationship, I felt that something was wrong in this situation. Therefore, in the 4th week, I decided to leave for work at 9 a.m., but it turned out that by this time she had not yet returned home. Deciding to clarify the situation and deal with obsessive thoughts, I decided to visit the bar where she worked. The business summit was held in a luxury 5-star hotel, and Olivia's company signed a contract to manage the bar and provide bartending services at the event. On the way to the hotel, I decided to surprise Olivia with her favorite berry cocktail and a fresh croissant, intending to bring them to the bar. But when I arrived at the hotel, I was disappointed. The bar was closed, the doors were locked, the lights were dimmed, and there was an eerie silence in the room. Deciding to find out the details, I went to the hotel reception and asked how the bar worked. When I approached the receptionist and asked the question about the work of the bar at the early hour of 10 a.m., they looked at me disapprovingly. She immediately replied that the bar closes at 1 o'clock in the morning, but I couldn't help but wonder if the hotel bar would stay open until morning in connection with the business summit. Perplexed about my question, the receptionist abruptly waved me off, repeating that the bar closes at 1 o'clock in the morning without any exceptions. Perhaps she found my question disturbing. My subconscious told me that she was deceiving me, but I didn't want to agree with that. Tormented by doubts, I contacted Olivia via message to find out where she was. To my surprise, she said she was in a bar. Doubting her answer, I took a picture of myself standing in front of a closed establishment and asked her to join me wherever she was, wanting to have a sincere conversation. To my chagrin, she replied that she would be home in an hour due to the fact that urgent matters had accumulated at work. I reluctantly got to the office, but I was still constantly busy with these disturbing thoughts. I sent a message to Olivia asking her to stay at home until we could discuss everything in more detail. Hastily finishing my work, I hurried home. When I got to the house, I saw Olivia's car parked at the entrance. An inexplicable feeling overwhelmed me, hinting that everything would change soon. But the shock that awaited me exceeded all my expectations. When I crossed the threshold of the front door, I immediately felt a change in the atmosphere in our house. I've never been very observant, leaving this task to Olivia, but something has clearly changed. There was a special atmosphere in the air. Sitting at our kitchen table, she looked tense and at ease, as if she was burdened with some undisclosed information. It was then that 3 suitcases, neatly packed and placed behind her, caught my attention. At first, she was silent, which caused me a wave of anxiety. I couldn't tell if she was having trouble choosing her words or if she was just waiting for me to start a conversation. Every moment seemed endless to me as I plucked up the courage to ask what it was about. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she plucked up the courage to admit that she had an irresistible opportunity that made her realize her long-held dream. But her voice was trembling, and she avoided meeting my gaze, but treading a lie in her words with each of her lies. Despite my usually calm disposition, the intensity of my anger increased. The realization that the person I trusted implicitly was deceiving me caused a furious reaction in me, and I slammed my hand on the table in irritation. I raised my voice and demanded that she tell the truth. During our 2-year marriage, this was the only time when I lost my composure in communicating with Olivia. But deception tends to show the darkest sides of a person, and at that moment, she finally confessed. I often regret that I didn't have to question her because the pain of this revelation is still alive in my memory. My wife was leaving me for one of the businessmen she met in a bar, a wealthy man living outside the city. 5 years have passed since that fateful day. During a difficult period of my life, I faced various obstacles. Although the specifics are not essential here, I managed to sell our old house and move to a more attractive area. In addition, I found happiness by marrying a wonderful and purposeful woman in the Caribbean, with whom I now have a child. When life gets better, there is no reason to dwell on the past. Over the past few years, Olivia's gradually become a distant memory. Unexpectedly, she recently contacted me, expressing a desire to meet when she returns to the city. I decided to ignore her messages, but she kept writing to me, insisting that it was very important. Although I had no desire to renew our relationship, curiosity got the better of me. I reluctantly agreed to meet her for a cup of coffee, wanting to listen to her. When I entered the cafe, I immediately noticed that she was sitting in a booth and patiently waiting for my arrival. When her eyes met, a smile spread across her face, which made me doubt for a moment that her intentions were only to ask for forgiveness. At first, she tried to maintain a calm demeanor, having a casual conversation as befits a person who has met someone again after many years of silence. But I couldn't help but notice that she was returning to her old manipulative techniques. While discussing her return to the city, she was deliberately looking for opportunities to invade my personal space or initiate physical contact. Despite my attempts to distance myself or dismiss her advances, it was clear that she believed that she could convince me. I stepped back from her even further and firmly told her to respect her boundaries. When she realized that I wouldn't back down, her cheeks turned pink. She said these words, claiming that she missed me, but deep down I knew that this was far from the case. It took her a few moments to abandon her marriage when a rich man began to show her signs of attention. In all these 5 years, she has never tried to contact me. Not once. And then I asked her to give up her facade and reveal the true reason for her urgent request for meeting. Tears flowed down her face, and for the first time, I could not express sympathy. Seeing her pain when she left, the emotional pain she caused me was only a small part of what I experienced. She admitted that she had betrayed me and said that I hated her. Strangely enough, despite hating her, I still felt a sense of caring for her as a person. Some part of me resisted going into the details of her situation and her connection with me. I asked about her intentions, and she told me that she needed to borrow a certain amount of money, more precisely, $5,000. It turns out that her wealthy boyfriend never proposed to her when he started a relationship with his attractive new assistant. Olivia was dumped, and now she has no money at all. It looks like karma has finally caught up with her. I shouldn't have been so shocked when she wanted to meet for that reason. During our life together, my love for her clouded my mind. But now that she's gone, I understand the role I played in her life. As you can see, everything became clear to me. As a child, she never paid attention to me, but one evening in a bar when my friends and I were talking, she accidentally overheard conversation. We talked, and she found out that I have a great job in a new apartment that I moved into. Perhaps after a few bottles of beer, I inadvertently mentioned how much money I earned. It was at this moment that she seemed to see only dollar signs in me and began to consider me as an easy target for her charm. Looking back, I only realized all this after she left. It became clear to me that I wasn't going to lend her money. Interested in her situation, I decided to find out what caused her financial need. She told me in detail about her circumstances after the breakup of the relationship. She returned to her homeland, hoping to find refuge with her parents while she would arrange her life. Unfortunately, she did not know that her parents had sold their house and moved to a modest 2-room apartment on the seashore. Due to this unforeseen circumstance, she explained that the money was necessary for her to start a new life. My ex-wife wanted to rent an apartment and asked for financial support to cover the costs of working on a painting that she was going to sell to one of the popular galleries in the city. Naturally, I asked if the gallery had agreed to commission her for this painting. She stressed that she would like to make her creative pursuits a priority in her marriage, but unfortunately, for 2 years, she has not created a single painting or any other work of art. To tell the truth, I had no idea about her artistic abilities, since I had not seen any of her previous work. She admitted that she did not communicate with any of the gallery's employees. Her plans included creating a work that she could offer them for sale. This behavior was typical of her. She thought she could easily captivate them with her mere presence. I immediately refuted her assumption. I behaved tactfully, refraining from expressing the rude thoughts that came over me. Instead, I honestly told her about my situation. I had recently become a parent and was diligently paying off my mortgage, and I just couldn't afford to allocate such an amount. Despite her attempts to negotiate $33,000, I stood my ground and did not give up. Then she began to express her concerns about the lack of housing, referring to the fact that the bar where she used to work has moved under new management and does not need help. But no matter what she tried to convince me, I remain of my opinion. If she wants to embark on a journey of self-discovery, she will have to finance it herself. I said I was ready to support her emotionally, but financially it's just not possible. But she made a bold choice, deciding to fall into the arms of a millionaire. The change in her behavior was unforgettable. From a naive and preoccupied woman, she quickly turned into a ruthless rival. It was at this moment that she uttered the words, "You actually owe me." I didn't achieve anything during our divorce. I didn't claim alimony or even a fair share of the sale of the house, but she hinted that my leniency could be revoked. That statement alone was enough for me. Perhaps I said a few harsh words to her, which is understandable, right? But with this incident, my willingness to give her a chance ended. When I got home, I immediately took precautions and blocked her on all social networks. In addition, in order to protect myself, I turned for advice to a person poorly connected with law. My colleague's brother worked at a law firm and informed me that according to the laws of this state, She could not bring any claims against me after the completion of our initial divorce proceedings. She did not have a viable business to continue, and financial difficulties did not allow her to fight it. I approve of her efforts, but I will not deceit for any more. I took a step towards blocking her number and all applications on social networks. But living in a close-knit society, it is difficult to completely avoid talking about someone. Despite all my efforts to distance myself, others inevitably recall her current activities. I recently found out that she moved upstate to live with one of her former high school friends. Fortunately, she will no longer have the opportunity to interfere in my life. If she wants to continue her games, she will have to find another unsuspecting victim. In the following weeks, my wife, child, and I went on an exciting journey, traveling around the state and discovering its wonders. I was pleasantly struck by the exceptional adaptability of our child to travel. On the way back, we decided to make a stop at a diner conveniently located next to the highway. Despite its unassuming appearance, at that moment, my family and I were hungry to such an extent that we could not afford to be selective in choosing a place to eat. After we took our seats and made an order, I went to the toilet. While I was washing my hands, I heard some commotion coming from behind the toilet doors. Apparently, the manager was making a remark to one of the employees. The manager noted that this is the third complaint against this employee in a week. Apparently, the employee mistakenly gave the 4-year-old hot sauce instead of ketchup. I was struck by a voice that seemed familiar to me. Despite my best efforts, I could not determine where I had already heard it. It was Olivia, sincerely apologizing to the manager and promising to change her actions as if this was her last opportunity to redeem herself. In a normal situation, I would quietly wait at the toilet until they finished the conversation, realizing that the employee who received a reprimand does not need unnecessary inconvenience. But this situation aroused my curiosity, forcing me to stand observe. Going out into the corridor of the restaurant through the door of the toilet room, I heard the manager scolding her, calling her irresponsible and lazy. He criticized her for being careless about her plot, leaving it unattended and in a dirty state. It was clear that this was the last warning, as the manager stressed that one more mistake and she would be fired. The expression on her face at that moment made an indelible impression on me. I will remember this sight forever. When her manager said those words, I realized that I was probably the last person she wanted to run into. I decided not to tell her anything, although the manager seemed somewhat embarrassed that the client overheard and making a remark to an employee. He came over to her table to apologize and generously offered Kara and me a free dessert. To be honest, I didn't have high hopes for the small diner, but getting a free pie and watching my ex-wife take responsibility for her actions met all expectations. I will constantly give positive feedback about this place from now on. My main priorities are family and career. I guess she got the consequences she deserved.